We're beginning Chapter 4 of Surprise Kill Vanish by Annie Jacobson, Special Forces. In 1953, Billy Waugh was transferred to a U.S. military base in Augsburg, Germany. Before he left, he saved up his army money and bought himself a car, a sharp-looking 1949 Chevrolet four-door sedan. It was his first car, and he adored it. When he received orders to travel to Germany, he arranged to have it shipped across the Atlantic so he could drive it around the Autobahn. A few weeks after he arrived in country, his Chevy arrived. The Army notified him to say that his automobile was in the port city of Bremerhaven, 475 miles away. On the train ride there, he noticed two U.S. Army sergeants wearing unusual patches, with a parachute and aircraft on their shoulders. "Why are you wearing that patch?" Waugh asked. The men said that they were part of a new outfit in Bad Tolls. "Where the hell is Bad Tolls?" he asked. They said it was about 80 miles southeast of the U.S. military base in Augsburg. "What do you do there?" they said. Waugh asked. They couldn't tell him, they said. Now they really had Waugh's attention. "Do you have any vacancies?" Waugh asked. "We need MOS triple ones," one of the men said, platoon sergeants. Waugh pointed to his own shoulder to a combat infantry badge, indicating that he was MOS 111 eligible. The mysterious men gave him contact information. "I got my car, hightailed it back to Augsburg, and asked for a 1049 request for transfer. Within a week, I was transferred, badge and baggage, to Bad Tolls. I signed in at headquarters, went straight to the snack bar, and introduced myself to the 6 guys who were there," remembers Waugh. "Welcome to the 10th Special Forces," one of them said. The group was a classified U.S. Army program that trained soldiers for unconventional warfare. The first of its kind, just 4 months old. It had been named the 10th Special Forces so as to deceive the Soviets into thinking there were 9 other Special Forces units ready to engage in sabotage, subversion, and other forms of guerrilla warfare. Waugh remembers feeling awestruck. "I'd found my true home." If the U.S. Army went into the Korean War with no formal special operations capabilities, it came out with a plan for an unconventional warfare unit for use in future wars. Outraged over its stalemate with the CIA regarding who controlled covert operations in Korea, General McClure went directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, determined to create for the Army a special forces capability like no other in the world. But to achieve success, said McClure, the organization should start modest and austere. McClure knew that unconventional warfare was frowned upon by most generals in the Defense Department. He didn't want to jeopardize the potential for success. In its simplest terms, the Army's vision for unconventional warfare was to support resistance movements in foreign lands, local guerrilla forces that shared America's pro-Western, anti-communist goals. Any resistance movement that the U.S. Army would engage with would likely already be militarized and semi-organized. But to say that unconventional warfare could ever be defined in simple terms was wishful thinking. Resistance movements were notoriously turbulent, almost always led by charismatic leaders with big personalities, some noble, others corrupt. For the U.S. Army to find success in training and equipping these foreign fighters, its Special Forces operators would have to be flexible, patient, and extremely disciplined. They'd have to be self-reliant, quick-thinking warriors capable of operating in openly hostile territory without the support of conventional military forces close by. In the winter of 1952, General McClure secured the necessary blessing for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The 10th Special Forces Group would be a small and secret unit. Its soldiers would be known as quiet professionals. Finding the right volunteers was a priority. McClure had adjunct generals prepare a roster of ex-OSS officers with commando, ranger, and guerrilla warfare backgrounds. He sent one of his officers to visit with retired General William Donovan at Donovan's law office in New York City. Donovan shared with McClure his personal files, containing the names and addresses of more than 3,900 former soldiers who served in the OSS during the war. The Army sent out queries to hundreds of these individuals, some active duty service members, others retired, to see if they were interested in volunteering for the clandestine unit. Volunteers had to be at least 21 years old, airborne qualified, or willing to become so, and able to pass a series of physical and psychological tests. Enlisted men accepted into Special Forces had to commit to training in one or more of 5 specialty areas: operations and intelligence, engineering, weaponry, communications, and medical aid. On June 19th, 1952, the Army activated its first unconventional warfare unit at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, consisting of 1 officer, 1 warrant officer, and 7 enlisted men. The group's first commander was OSS Jedburgh Colonel Aaron Bank. By the end of the month, 122 soldiers of all ranks were present for duty. In November of the following year, the 10th Special Forces Group, airborne, received overseas orders and sailed for Europe. They arrived at Bremerhaven and then traveled by train to Bad Tolz. Their facility was a former Nazi training facility for the Waffen-SS. The group's original mission was to conduct unconventional warfare behind enemy lines in the event of a Soviet invasion of Europe, modeled after what the OSS Jedburghs had accomplished in France. These small 12-man units were called A detachments, or A-teams. Each was made up of 2 officers and 10 non-commissioned officers, or NCOs. Every individual on the team had to pass months of training and a series of grueling tests to become Special Forces qualified and wear the Green Beret. Each A-team would be capable of infiltrating a target by air, land, or sea, and exfiltrating stealthily. Each team, led by a captain, had members trained in weapons, demolition and engineering, medical, communications and operations, and intelligence. They would build their own bases, conduct their own perimeter defense, and be able to operate in hostile territory for an indefinite period of time. Everyone on the team was schooled in at least 1 foreign language. The member of this new group, called Special Forces, prided themselves on being a certain breed of soldier with distinct temperaments and special abilities. Hard-bitten troops who were willing to take calculated risks and face challenges that conventional units never be concerned with, said Bank. Men born of an almost inhuman ability to absorb any stressful situation and carry into battle without letting mental concerns or emotions get in the way. Operators need to be extremely competitive, self-reliant, stress-resistant, and stoic to the point of arrogant. Major General Edward Partain, an early member of Special Forces, summed it up this way. In the early 50s, Special Forces groups were not a recognized part of the Army. They were seen as outsiders, great warriors, but they could not live comfortably within the peacetime regimental system. You had people of the sort that you wished you could keep. You had people of the sort that you wished you could deep freeze on the last battlefield and thaw out on the next battlefield for the next war. It was a rough group, Billy Waugh recalls. Special Forces operators being called snake eaters, miscreants, and rogues. Conventional officers in starched shirts. Many of those recruited for Special Forces in the early 1950s were soldiers who fought in World War II for foreign armies in foreign countries. Men like Larry Thorne. Larry Thorne, christened Larry Torni in Finland, stands out as a Special Forces legend, fearless, driven, and recklessly daring. He would have been at home with the Greeks, who infiltrated Troy inside a wooden horse, said James Goodby, former U.S. ambassador to Finland. The doomed protagonist in the mold of ancient Greek heroes. Thorne began his career as captain in the Finnish Army Reserves, where he trained army ski groups. Where the Soviet Union invaded Finland in November 1939, Torni served as unit commander. Under arduous conditions in the sub-zero temperatures, Torni and his unit were infiltrated behind enemy lines, where they engaged in hit-and-run operations on skis against Russian troops. The Red Army had more than 3 times as many soldiers as the Finns, and what should have been clear Russian victories instead went to Torni's unit. In reaction to Thorne's brave, devastating raids behind Soviet lines, the Red Army placed a price on his head, dead or alive. Reputedly, only the Finnish soldier so singled out for bounty, says his biographer James Michael Cleverly. For his leadership and bravery, Torni was awarded the Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, the country's highest commendation for valor and the equivalent of the U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor. Finland's relations with the Soviet Union changed several times during the war, and when the country's leaders turned to Nazi Germany for military aid, Torni traveled to Austria for 7 weeks of training with the Waffen-SS. He returned to Finland as a Finnish officer and was also recognized as a German Unsturmführer. In 1943, he commanded a guerrilla warfare unit called Detachment Torni. This 70-man anti-Soviet strike force was a Finnish Waffen-SS battalion. As its commander, Lauri Torni wore a Nazi uniform and was awarded the Iron Cross. After the war ended, he was arrested and charged with treason. Found guilty and sentenced to 6 years, he was incarcerated in Finland's notorious Turku prison. But the indomitable Lauri Torni escaped from prison 3 times until he was transferred to Riihimäki prison on the small island north of Helsinki. In December 1948, he was pardoned by Finnish President Juho Paasikivi and released. But when the threat of additional war crime charges resurfaced, Torni assumed the identity of a Finnish merchant sailor and fled to Venezuela under the alias Enil Morsky. From Venezuela, he secured passage on a freighter headed to the United States, just a few miles out of the shores of Mobile, Alabama. Thorny leapt overboard and swam to shore in a classic example of clandestine infiltration into a foreign target. A fugitive in the United States, he made his way to New York City, changed his name to Larry Thorne, and worked as a carpenter in Brooklyn and Connecticut. It did not take long for the consummate warfighter to become restless and bored. In 1951, he sought out William Donovan, the former director of the OSS, and asked for his help joining an American unconventional warfare unit. Donovan schooled Thorne on the newly instaged Lodge-Philbin Act, which Massachusetts Senator Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. had been instrumental in getting passed. It allowed foreigners to join the U.S. military and earn citizenship if they served honorably with the United States for at least 5 years. Larry Thorne breezed through U.S. Army basic training and was signed out as a prime candidate for the 10th Special Forces Group. Sent to Bad Tolls, he became an invaluable part of the unit. Thorne is one of the most devoted and conscientious officers I have known, wrote his commander, an aggressive officer who is at his best in a situation which demands physical exertion, direct action, and forceful leadership. In addition to his physical prowess and irregular warfare skill set, he spoke English, German, and Estonian, Swedish, Norwegian, and of course Finnish. Working alongside Larry Thorne, Billy Wall was amazed by the soldier's breadth of talent, his discipline, stamina, and confidence. At Bad Tolls, Thorne was participating in a 3rd Military Command. He'd fought for the Finns, the Nazis, and now the United States. He was what we called a total runner, explains Waugh. Having engaged in clandestine ops for several nations in just about every environment known to man, he could adapt to stressful situations anywhere in the world. Mostly, he prepared going at it alone. In Bad Tolls, Larry Thorne was made captain and became the quintessential Green Beret. He was exactly what the Special Forces were looking for in a warfighter. One example of Thorne's skill and prowess involved the successful completion of a perilous mission in Iran. In 1957, a U.S. Army single-engine Otter aircraft filled with classified military equipment crashed somewhere in the mountains of northern Iran, in uncharted territory. The rescue operation called for locating the crash site, getting a team in there, recovering the bodies and the classified equipment, and getting out undetected. 3 previously orchestrated attempts had all failed when Captain Larry Thorne volunteered for the job. Thorne parachuted into Iran with a 12-man team of Green Berets. The unit made their way up a 14,000-foot peak, recovered all the bodies and the equipment, then exfiltrated through Tehran. Bad Tolls was not for everyone, but for the disciplined nonconformists who embraced unconventional warfare, it was home. Countless foreign languages could be heard spoken at the coffee shop and around the team rooms. Beside European languages, French, Polish, Czech, one heard Turkish, Arabic, Urdu, Farsi, and Pashto. The concept of training guerrilla fighters in other countries was at the core of the new U.S. Army Special Forces capability. Partnership with special units of foreign armies was a primary goal. In service of the mission, Special Forces operators trained with teams in Norway, Germany, Spain, Italy, Turkey, Pakistan, Iran, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. A team led by Major Joseph Callahan traveled to Jordan to establish the first airborne school for the Jordanian army at the behest of King Hussein. A team led by Steve Snowden traveled to Turkey to train what would become known as the Turkish Special Forces. Another group went to Saudi Arabia and trained 350 officers and non-commissioned officers in a guerrilla warfare supported by King Faisal. 4 teams traveled to Iran to train the Iranian Special Forces in mountain warfare. Another team trained Kurdish tribesmen in the mountains of Iran. 1 team went to Pakistan, where they trained with their special warfare warriors in desert warfare. The 10th Special Forces Group remained a closely guarded secret until 1955, when the New York Times published a cryptic article about the men, describing them as a liberation force designed to fight behind enemy lines. The photograph showed members of the group wearing their green berets, their faces blacked out to keep their identities concealed. The U.S. Army Special Forces began to grow. Hundreds, then thousands of unconventional American warriors volunteered to join this elite group. They worked tirelessly, training and equipping guerrilla fighters around the globe so as to keep the threat of Soviet expansion in check. U.S. Army Special Forces soldiers would eventually fight secret wars alongside many of the foreign fighters they trained. Other times they would find themselves fighting against them. And that's it.